All right, hello and welcome everybody to Dispersing the Fog. This is March 1st, 2026, and this is Paul, episode 50.
50.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
yeah, we made it to 50 episodes now. So this is about a year, I guess we've been doing this, Paul, and building up a nice audience. 50, man, oh man, it's we're middle-aged now.
Well, at least you are.
Getting to going in the right direction in some ways, maybe mentally in career, but downwards in physical and all
I don't
those.
know. I still subscribe to the line from the old Bob Dylan song, My Back Pages, which is
Oh my goodness, that's a
fill the
long
blank.
song, Paul.
I was so much older then,
Older than
younger
I'm better
than
than
that
that
now.
now. Yes, there we
Yes.
go. Oh man, I can't believe I got stumped on a Dylan question, but I will say, as the closer one to 50, I did play hockey all weekend and played 4 games and didn't do too bad. Knocked out in the semifinals. So, Paul, we've
I
got
can't
a.
believe you're still doing that.
It's I was the oldest player, oldest skater in the tournament. My old teammate Scott Avery is a year older than me. He was in nets for one of the teams, but anyway, no, it was a fun weekend. Paul, we've got a great guest coming along. This is the first time for Amy Herdy, who is with Cove Tower Investigations for Films, documentary filmmaker. Going to talk to us a little bit. Does a lot of, crime-based film documentaries, and so we're going to talk about that world and maybe connect it back to some of the stories we've been talking about.
Well, I think that the reason I like having Amy Herdy here is that people are wondering, 6 years after the Nova Scotia massacres, why has nothing been done? Why are there no documentaries? Why is there, there's been a few little pieces here and there. A little documentary recently on Lisa Banfield that left out a lot of the facts. Why has nothing substantial been done? And I think our discussion with her is going to explain basically the relationship between stories, the documentary makers, the police, and I think people are going to see learn a little bit here about how the world really works.
Yeah.
You know?
It's interesting to know because I've had that question. Others have. There was that episode of Fear Thy Neighbor where I did some commentary that was featured in it, but it was part of a TV series. Didn't get really super wide release in the US from what I can tell. But we'll hear from Amy Herdy in a little bit. Lots of other stories to get to this week. It was been a busy week on a few different fronts. But what about yourself, Paul? What are you up to this week?
As busy as usual, we have a huge order for glass pieces, like small pieces, but we're in the process of making over 1,000 of them. So I'm like stiff and sore just from cutting glass. In my other world, I was on the Alex Pearson show again this week in Toronto, uh, radio talk show, and talking about prisons. Because about 2 weeks ago, a little less than 2 weeks ago, uh, the government put out a press release talking about a seizure of all kinds of goods at Collins Bay Prison in Kingston, Ontario. And what got my attention, and I had to check this out, is they seized what they said was more than 1.5 million, more than $1.5 million worth of goods going into the prison. And the key thing was a load of shatter. You know what shatter is?
Yes.
For those who don't, you can explain it.
Yeah. Uh, Shatter to well, maybe I'm wrong on this, Paul. To me, it's the discard parts of cannabis.
Well, yeah, it's that, but then it's um, processed with butane, and the product comes out like a yellow amber um, substance, almost looks like toffee. But the THC levels are 5 to 6 times higher than in normal strong cannabis, which might be 13, 15% on the strong level. This is like 90%.
So they take you take your good parts of the bud, and that's your cannabis. You take the rest of it, and they boil it down or something and make it into an oily, like, or sort
Yeah.
of a gel-like substance almost.
Yeah, and so
Like
the
it.
shatter,
Yeah.
the shatter had a in institution value of $1.3 million.
Whew.
So this tells you a couple of things, and this is the point of the show, that the prisons right across Canada are being bombarded daily with multiple attempts using drones, delivering things to the prison, phones, weapons, drugs, whatever. They go right up to the windows. There's no real system, and they drop it off to people reaching through the window and disappear. And there's no real system to track these things. From what I understand it from various prisons, they go around to the neighborhood and tell people if you see a drone, call 911. And there are all kinds of issues with it. And in this particular case, the shatter, as I understand it, was found inside a barbell weight, but it was a fake barbell weight.
Oh,
It
okay.
was made with a 3D printer, so it was all plastic. It looked just like the real thing.
Well, with some shatter in it, it would probably be useful and practical as a weight, as a
Yeah.
barbell.
So there,
First.
so you can see why so much is being invested by criminal organizations to get inside the prisons because it's very lucrative. But things are dropping literally out of the sky. I've heard stories from across the country where, prison staff will be walking through the yards and something will drop right beside them, or they'll see a drone and have to try to react to the drone going around to another side of the building and whatever. It's craziness.
Wonder what's going to happen now when what's the solution? Is it within the prison to be able to better track the drones, or is it on the drone purchase side? And, all of a sudden drones will be in the same world as motor vehicles and firearms, where every single one of them will have to be registered and connected to a person so that, if one is seized, for example, dropping drugs inside a prison, that person can be identified maybe more easily than the case might be right now.
Yeah, you're right. There's got to be some sort of development there because this is all being exacerbated by the fact that there are cutbacks in the federal prison and new cutbacks being proposed. And the government hasn't kept up with renovating some of the prisons, so they're really bad. I mean, in Kingston, in one of the penitentiaries in Kingston, three prisoners died within a 2 week period recently, and there's been no investigation. The staff is going like, "What the hell's going on here? Is it dangerous? What's going on?" And it's not fentanyl because they just had an inquest about fentanyl killing 5 people in the prisons, and now it's gone in. Shatter is the new big thing, and there are all kinds of conditions inside. Plus, you're getting they're hiring guards at a furious rate, but training them less and hiring people who, frankly, probably shouldn't be in the prison system. People who don't speak English very well. This leads to, situations with communications where, things might be going south somewhere and they can't clearly explain the problem. Plus, it's just, I got a really bad feeling something really bad's going to happen in one of these prisons very soon. And a
Wow.
lot of it has to do with the way they're being run not by the people on the ground, but by the people at the top who are making decisions who have no real understanding, it seems, of how a prison should work and are sticking to sort of dogmatic political principles about how to run a prison. And it doesn't really work.
Another another example of it seems like a shortage of qualified people to be able to work in certain positions or you know.
Well, no,
Hmm.
I think there are people who'd like to work there, but I mean, from what I understand, right across the country, I'm getting this. That it's the old story, the new old story that if you're a white male, you're not getting hired in the prison.
Yeah. Well, that's the
And
problem. You have to be able to de-escalate too, and
yeah, you
communication
have to
skills are important
de-escalate.
for that.
That's right. And you've got to have some confidence in your abilities, some strength might be required occasionally. Um, and you got to understand the culture inside the prison. I mean, essentially what's happening now, they're hiring people. It's the old story. We want, we have a large contingent of indigenous people in jail or blacks or South Asian, and we want the guards to reflect the population. Well, that doesn't really work. You've got a black gangbanger from Toronto and you're bringing someone in from Senegal. They're not speaking the same language. They don't have the same history. They don't have the same anything. Um, it's for lack of a better description, it's DEI gone crazy, and I feel really concerned about what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, prisons are an often overlooked part of the justice system, and it's for some people they don't want to look that way, but it's it's important to do so.
And I would like, people within the prison system or recent departees from the prison system to come on the show and talk about it because I think it's a big issue, it's a growing issue, and it's a safety issue. And I don't think the unions themselves are dealing with it properly.
All right, well that's a good story and a good call out too. We're always always happy to hear from people. Heard from a lot of people, by the way, Paul, this week. Lots of reaction to Dave Moore last week with his comments on AI being used in the ports. There was That's the sort of good side of AI. We saw a little bit this week of maybe some of the question marks around AI, talking about Tumbler Ridge, right? OpenAI called in by the minister, Evan Solomon, the minister of AI, federal minister, and talked to the justice minister as well, Sean Fraser, about, what it was that OpenAI knew, heard about from the Tumbler Ridge shooter, how they're reacting. So we unfortunately haven't learned a whole lot more, but people are saying, this demands more, maybe even an inquiry into that shooting. So what happened this week? OpenAI has said that they removed the shooter from their platform, but they didn't report it to the police. But under their current protocols, they would report the person to the police. Here's the problem, Paul. We don't know what any of the inputs from the shooter were to the AI question, typing in questions or search terms, and we don't know what the AI spit out in return by as an answer. So it's that hasn't stopped many people from having an opinion on the subject about it. This is bad. We have to put in but we don't know what happened. Like, why won't they just tell us, Paul, what the inputs were and what the outputs were, and we can all kind of decide?
Well, it is scary, the whole development of AI, seeing what's going on in the States. You know, the one company just telling Trump they can't, that we can't deal with, we're not going to allow our product to be used to basically conduct mass surveillance or be involved in active war. And we need some, there obviously needs to be some sort of accountability here and some guardrails put up. Unfortunately, I think most of the population basically goes, oh, well, I like it when I turn on my computer and it gives me a little AI summary of what the story is and da da da. This is a dangerous thing. It's potentially very, very dangerous. And we need some controls. We can't go with complete deregulation on everything like the
Yeah.
anarchists and libertarians would like us to do
Yeah.
because society has developed because of regulations, not in spite of them.
There's been some attempts, but I'm sure the AI executives will take notice of the last 10 years or whatever, a failure of governments to regulate the regular quote unquote social media companies, Twitter and Facebook, all that to any large extent. But anyway, it may come here. I think there will be I predict anyway that there'll be a renewed push to deal with this through the Online Harms Act that had been proposed. There was sort of two parts to it. One was sort of protecting of people of, imagery and such or unwanted contact, but the the second part, which the government kind of insisted on including, was all about sort of free speech intrusion. So if they would just deal with the first part, maybe we might see some legislation on this topic coming up. But I don't know if I would recommend, Paul. I don't know. I don't know if I'd recommend an inquiry into the Tumbler Ridge situation if it calls for one. What do you think?
What's an inquiry going to accomplish?
That's the problem.
Inquiries in Canada are basically used as, like we pointed out with the Mass Casualty Commission and the Braidwood inquiry and other inquiries in recent years. They're basically used by the government to institute some policy. They don't really get down and get down into the dirt about what's going on. We don't have a process like that unless the government can come up with a new process for conducting inquiries. Public inquiries are useless in Canada.
Like I could see them dealing with, the AI thing, and if that mattered to the situation, guns and mental health, that territory's been covered, but maybe another round at it. The gender questions of the shooter, if that mattered in any way. Like, but I just don't. I just see it as putting off any of the questions through an inquiry and insulating the politicians from having to answer any other questions. So,
That's what they use it
yeah.
for. You're quite right.
Yeah.
That's exactly what the politicians use it for. Oh, it's an inquiry. We can't say anything. They've been doing that for 6 years since the Nova Scotia massacres, hiding behind public inquiries and committees and whatever, and not dealing with the fundamental issues that were involved there.
So Paul, before we're gonna bring in Amy Herdy here before very long, but just maybe think another topic of this week, and a person we've discussed a few times on the show, former now Justice Minister of Nova Scotia, Becky Druhan, was in the news this week. So I have a prediction. Just listen, I listened to her interview. Now she was the Justice Minister, was removed from cabinet, then decided that she didn't want to sit in the government caucus anymore, sitting as an independent. Now there are two independent MLAs in Nova Scotia, her and Elizabeth Smith McCrossin. Well, this was a bad week for the premier, I would say. He was booed last night at the African Nova Scotian Gala in Halifax. He's dropped his budget with all kinds of cuts to programs. There's protests happening and being planned. But what drew my attention was this interview with Becky Druhan on CBC. And one of the first questions was, how are you getting along with things? And her answer was, well, I'm just, my plans are to represent Nova Scotians. And she continued with her answer. I'm like, represent Nova Scotians. She didn't say represent the people of her riding, which is what Elizabeth Smith McCross and the other independent MLA always that's how she always frames, well, I'm doing my work for my constituents, and as an independent, I can still do that. Becky Druhan said Nova Scotians, which makes me think that she might be planning to run for the leadership of the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia, a vacant position, and maybe oppose her former boss, Premier Tim Houston. I don't know. There was
Does she really have the legs to do that? I mean,
I wonder. She's been doing a lot of media. She was in question period and then promoting the question she asked on social media. I think she's making moves here.
well, maybe she could explain to everyone why she stopped being Attorney General and Public Safety Minister.
Well,
What
that was
happened?
interesting, and I think she wants to. So she asked in question period if the premier would agree to relieve her from cabinet confidentiality and solicitor-client privilege as the justice minister so that she could speak freely about everything that, she learned and knew when she was in government. And Scott Armstrong, the justice minister, shot that down, said, no, and he gave a good answer. Actually, this is important to a functioning legislature. I
Which
mean,
meets occasionally.
yes, which means when
Yeah.
it's in our interest, we find this to be an
Yeah.
important principle.
The legislators are going to sit for 17 hours this month, and we'll be back next year. See you.
It's yeah, I mean, that's becoming a problem too. I mean, it's very, very short legislative sessions. They don't want to answer questions. A couple of the ministers this week answering questions about the budget, they were stuttering and stumbling. They couldn't answer anything. I don't know.
An interesting point is like you brought up, Premier Houston of Nova Scotia, like premiers across the country, some are better than others, but he's one of the things he's cut back on is, the Nova Scotia Black community is complaining, the arts community is complaining because of cutbacks in the arts and all kinds of services. Meanwhile, Nova Scotia Power is completely out of control. People are getting billed ridiculous amounts of money. The government is, allowed this, successive governments have allowed this to happen. But one twist, and I got to get back to what we talked last week about
Yeah.
John Risley, Nova Scotia's billionaire for the last couple of years, who got pretty well everything he ever wanted from government, but he forgot to pay taxes on most of it. He any door would open up to him in government because it's John Risley. And I see now that the stories from last week, we talked about how much money his companies owed and how he's lost control of what some companies. Uh, he owes $1 billion Canadian in his companies. A billion. His mansion in Halifax just went up for sale the other day,
Yeah.
$14.3 million.
It's a
How
start.
much money did the government give him over the years? He owes like 300 million or more to Canada Revenue. But these are the guys who get all the perks, get to call the shots, and they're not
Yeah.
paying the piper.
Yeah. And everybody looks at them like they've got the secret. Well, in a way they do because they keep getting governments to give them money, but you know, they're not always successful either. They're not geniuses. But
No, they're not. And
Mhm.
that, I see people, or, in my town, Risley has, a whole bunch of stuff in my town, as we talked about last week. This is where he's based. And you see people, oh, I saw John Risley today. I mean, who cares? This guy, he's not paying his taxes. I could make all kinds of arguments about why he's not a good guy. And to see politicians sort of slobbering over his presence over the years, the only thing worse is when, I've seen politicians when Mounties walk into the room at a public meeting and they almost sort of have to fan themselves to cool off because they're so sort of enamored.
Yeah.
I mean, what has ever happened to detachment and public accountability and working for the people? That's what the government is. It's working for the people, not for the billionaires. I hate to sound like I'm dealing with Donald Trump and his gang, but it's the same problem down there.
It's the same thing and over the past 20, 30 years, this problem has just gotten completely out of hand. And the gap between the wealth gap between, people that have wealth and the billionaire class and regular people has just widened and widened and widened. There's been studies done on this, and Thomas Piketty, the French economist, talking about how, income earners haven't gotten ahead over the last 30 years, but wealth holders have gotten ahead enormously. And they just keep, but the governments could do something about it very easily, a wealth tax of some sort, or there's ways to deal with it policy wise, but they refuse to do it because they just they seem so enamored with this billionaire class, that the rich ones, that they just, all right, whatever you guys say. Oh, if you say higher taxes will disincentivize you from investment, oh well, forgive us for asking, you know?
And is anything going to get done in Nova Scotia, for example? Who is the premier? He spent 12 years working offshore, helping rich people not pay taxes. He can say whatever he wants. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't this. I was just doing my job. That's his game.
Yeah.
Helping rich people not pay taxes. Now we have John Risley defaulting on all kinds of things. It's unbelievable. You think the public would wake up and not elect people who help rich people get richer, you know? That's not how a society gets better. That's not how that's not how we got to where we are today.
No. No, it's certainly not. Paul, you mentioned we can circle back to this, but I was on all the law stories I watch. One of the ones, of course, was from down south and the Trump White House and the tariffs, right? And so it set up this big dramatic thing or potentially dramatic scene at the State of the Union on Tuesday night. Did you watch any of that?
Hell no.
You- So I've been watching State of the Union addresses since I guess Clinton was president. Not every year, maybe, but I like to watch them and see, it's kind of a big pageant and a good speech often. Not so much for Biden and Trump, but anyway, so the State of the Union usually, so members of Congress, the Senate, everybody's there, and the justices of the Supreme Court. There with their black robes sitting in front, Joint Chiefs of Staff, everybody's all the big. So this year, the Supreme Court makes a dramatic decision on tariffs on Friday. And here on Tuesday is the State of the Union, where the president, who's been just railing against them on social media, over the weekend and ever since the decision comes out is going to look at them. Anyway, I was like, is he is he going to disrespect the Supreme Court justices to their faces in this public way? And he didn't. First of all, though, only four of the nine showed up of the Supreme Court justices. Usually they're all there, but not this year. But he barely said it. He mentioned it. He said an unfortunate decision. But that was it. He didn't go after them in person. So I don't know what that says about him.
Well,
Decorum or chicken?
now that you've touched on that, he didn't mention in the State of the Union the Epstein affair.
No, he did not. He certainly
Didn't
did.
mention that, which is, and one thing on that, the beauty of the Epstein affair, I've addressed this in previous comments over the years, that when I was doing, the original investigation in Nova Scotia, I get former RCMP staff sergeants, part of the Vets Association, calling me or writing me and saying I was a conspiracy theorist. And according to, Masonic principles and Benjamin Franklin, founding father of the United States, inventor, scientist, politician, and revered Freemason, used to say, three can keep a secret if two are dead.
Yeah.
And this is gaslighting, because there are large conspiracies, and we see that with not only in Nova Scotia, and we showed what happened, but the Epstein affair. You look at it unraveling, and it's this huge conspiracy with hundreds, if not thousands, of people involved keeping the secret. Sordid, awful secrets. And that's how the world works. I mean, when you get people telling you three can keep a secret if two are dead, that's just gaslighting. They're lying to you. And the last point, I raised this last year, the funny study by Dr. I didn't think it's funny, but it's interesting. Dr. David Robert Grimes from Oxford University in England wrote about how the scope of massive conspiracies, how you could have like 1,000, 1,500 people. For a plot to last 5 years, Grimes wrote, the maximum number of people had to be 2,521 people.
That's a
That
pretty
if
precise
it's
number.
1,000 people, it'll last longer. If it's 125, it might last a century. There are huge conspiracies, and Epstein's one of them. And that we're dealing with it all the time. And looking at what's going on in Canada, there's obviously something going on here. We're not making it up.
No.
I mean, the rich and the powerful do not get held accountable in this country.
No, they do not. Yeah, Epstein, that thing is just giving legs to it's giving legs to a lot of other so-called conspiracy theorists. But it's legitimate. Like it shows that all of these very wealthy people that knew this guy, now the people are resigning all over the place. Larry Summers at Harvard, the artist formerly known as Prince Andrew, he's done. The other British politician, I'm trying to remember the name, but people are going down because of this, just knowing the guy. And it's like, well, yeah, look at that. All these rich people knew this guy.
And the sad thing about it is it made QAnon look right to
Yeah,
some
that's good.
degree,
Uh,
where there's this massive conspiracy of rich people. They didn't point out, they didn't realize that a lot of Republicans were involved too, but it wasn't just Republicans or Democrats. I mean, another good story on this was in the California Post, a new entity created by the New York Post, where they published documents from the Bohemian Grove, sort of a secret society in California, and you see that, judges, businessmen, Jimmy Buffett are all in this all men's, mostly white club that no one knew who belonged to it until this came out. Look it up. It's scary because it shows there's a whole all these people work at another level. They shouldn't be working at another. They're, Supreme Court judges Clarence Thomas shouldn't be involved in a private club with all kinds of businessmen who he's going
Oh,
to be ruling against. We've lost, there's no moral center anymore, no ethical center. And you wonder why things are going south and why there are intrigues and conspiracy theories. It's because of this stuff going on.
well, that in the New York Times, that Daniel Richman piece, he said, this we shouldn't have to release the Epstein files, but we do have to because there's no trust in the Department of Justice anymore to just do their job in a regular way. Like the people don't have that trust, and so this is what it leads to, right? They have to, all right, we don't trust your judgment, just show us everything and we'll take it from there. Yeah.
So let's move on to Amy. And one of the things I'll tell you how I met Amy,
Yeah.
that over the years I've dealt with many groups of people, from Annie to Chris Smith of the Tiger King people, all of them sniffing around about doing a documentary on the Nova Scotia massacres. And Amy came along years ago and expressed interest in it. We'll let her talk about it. But her company, Cove Tower Productions, has done, the Ocean Gate, Titan, the Ocean Gate disaster. They're doing one that's coming up on Gone Girls, the Long Island serial killers. That's coming March 31st. The catfishing of Tegan and Sarah. Good investigative stuff.
Yeah.
And I think she's a little different than everyone else, but I think she's going to explain some of the issues and problems and how difficult it is to get stuff done.
All right. All right, Paul. Well, that's a great introduction, and let's bring Amy in now, and we'll hear from her. And I think people are going to be very interested in hearing about this world. All right, there it is.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
There you
Sorry,
are.
Sounds great.
I don't check my email while I'm out running errands. We went to lunch. We went to like really a late breakfast brunch, and then yeah. We're
You're
just
in California. I thought you were in Colorado. That was,
no, I'm in California. Yeah,
Wow. Well, you're
oh,
going
you're living
from
the Cali life out there.
yeah. It's 70 degrees here right now. Don't hate me.
two of the nicest places on earth, Boulder, Colorado, and California. If you can
That is
figure out
very
how to live
true.
there, that's pretty good. Amy, well, we want to thank you and welcome you to the show. Thank you for
Yeah, well, I'm
taking
so
some
sorry
time.
for the delay. I hate making anybody wait.
Oh, not a problem at all. No, this is perfect, and we're glad to see you, and I know our viewers will be too. Paul just gave a very brief introduction for you there. Maybe I'll let him take it for a moment here, though.
Well, I was just explaining some of the projects you've worked on, and maybe you could explain how you got involved in
Mhm.
becoming interested in the Nova Scotia massacres in 2020.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was in Nova Scotia. My partner was born and raised in Nova Scotia, and we were on vacation and we drove past a gas station, and he said, that is a location where the gunman was shot by the RCMP after he murdered 22 people. And I said, what? I'd never heard of the case. And
Well,
that started that.
they kept a lid on the story, really. I mean, even people in Nova Scotia who don't pay attention didn't know about it.
Yeah, so
I
You know,
knew
I
nothing
actually
about
had months later, I had someone in the pharmacy say, "Oh, I said, I'm writing a book. What's it called? 22 Murders. 22 Murders. Is it real? Yeah. Where did it happen? Here. 22 people were murdered here. They didn't even know."
I had no idea. And he had your book and had read your book. So then I read your book, and then I was blown away by all the questions that remain and conflicting, storylines and pieces of evidence, and I became really intrigued.
Well, it seems, Amy, to fit in with some of the other work that you've been doing, that Cove Tower's been involved with and is doing now. So maybe a little background for our viewers about just what that what that world involves and how do
Sure.
people operate in there?
I started off as an investigative journalist, and I am still, to my core, a journalist. And so I abide by those ethics and mores and boundaries. And I have the unquenchable thirst, as Paul does, that an investigative journalist has, right? And I believe in the old-fashioned methods of talking to people and not just trying to work a telephone, trying to meet and talk with people face to face to find out the truth at the heart of a matter. And so I was a journalist and I went back and forth between print and television news. And then I did a three-part series called Betrayal in the Ranks for the Denver Post. We investigated how the U.S. military mishandles cases of sexual assault and domestic violence. And for that, I was interviewed by a filmmaking team for a film that was called Invisible War. And I became a producer behind the scenes for them, helping them out with interviews and with information and getting them some of my research. And when it came time for them to work on their next film, they hired me. And then I've been working on documentaries ever since. And then I branched out on my own a few years ago, and I wouldn't do anything else.
What are some of the documentaries you worked on? I referred to a couple from your website.
Oh, sure. So I was an investigative producer on The Hunting Ground. I was a co-producer on Harry and Meghan, the series on Netflix. I was a co-creator of Allen versus Farrow, which is on HBO, which is about Dylan Farrow naming her very famous father, Woody Allen, as her perpetrator. Um, so many projects. I was a producer of The Bleeding Edge. I love that film. I call that my journalistic film. We won the DuPont Award and the Polk Award for medical reporting, and it was the first time that documentary had ever beaten out their print competition. And that year, our competition included the Washington Post and the New York Times. So I was very gratified by that. I love The Bleeding Edge. It's about how the FDA basically is in bed with the medical device industry. And if you're going to get a medical device implanted in your body, you need to do a lot of research first to make sure that it's safe. Um, so there is that. And then I was a producer for Doug Lyman on his documentary Justice. Doug Lyman, as you know, famously the director of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Born Identity, two Tom Cruise movies,
Yeah.
and then an executive producer on Titan about the submarine that imploded, and just a lot of other projects that we get asked to work on along the way when people need help with investigative issues, because that's what I specialize in, and that's what I love to do.
So, Amy, if with your documentaries, I mean, do you normally have an outlet in mind or arranged in advance, like you mentioned Netflix before, as a platform for where the documentary is going to end up landing, or are you think in terms of, all right, I'm going to make this and then shop it around? How does that tend to work?
It depends on the project. So sometimes we are hired by the platform. Sometimes we are hired by a production company who already has a deal with the platform. Harry and Meghan had already been sold to Netflix. Um, Sometimes I start working on a project. I worked on Alan v. Farrell by myself for nearly a year before I could convince the rest of the team that it was a worthwhile project. Um, and the Bleeding Edge was the same. I worked on that for many months by myself before I could convince them that it was worth doing as a documentary. So sometimes you just have to trust your instincts and keep chipping away and hoping that you find enough evidence to get other people interested to bring a film to fruition.
We started this, from 2020 on. I mean, when this first happened, we were contacted by A&E and other groups basically showing interest. They want to do a documentary on this. and one by one, they all sort of fell by the wayside. Um, it's sort of like this endless group of very eager young women. It seems to be like that there's a few men, but it's mostly these eager young women who come in asking basically the same questions. They talk about scripted versus unscripted.
Yes.
And but at the end of the day, when I look at it, I'm seeing it's all scripted, one way or the other. There are formats, and they stick to the formats. What attracts you to this story, and how would you see yourself as being different from the A&E?
Oh my gosh, you hit on um a real hot button issue for me in the documentary film industry. It is populated by a large number of young producers who came up from the scripted side, and scripted means it's made up. It is following a script, or they came up from reality TV, which is scripted, and they are not journalists, and they do not talk to people that often in terms of securing subjects for a project, for example, doing their due diligence, making sure that the subject feels comfortable. They work on a project intermittently. And when you're a journalist, you're talking to subjects every day. You're working on stories every day. And that day in, day out exposure of dealing with people who sometimes have suffered a tremendous loss because they lost a family member or something horrific happened to them and they are a survivor. It really gives you the skills and the understanding of how to work with humans on a project like this. And I think that is being lost on this scripted generation. They don't get it. They don't have those skills. They are more comfortable with texting each other than having a conversation with a fellow human. They don't know how to just pick up the phone and talk to someone or go see them in person. And they certainly aren't journalists, and so they don't have those skills. And I don't know about you, Paul, but for me, God bless those years that I spent in newsrooms because it gave me so much in terms of knowledge and in terms of everything of how to pursue a story and how to find public records and how to convince whistleblowers to talk to you and how to handle survivors or family members of victims with sensitivity and care. It taught me so much. Um, so that's the answer to part of that question, how I differ from them. And what attracted me to this project, from a journalistic standpoint, this case, and I will call it a singular case, even though it's so many wrapped up into it, um, it's very complex, and that is what attracts me to it. And there's so many layers. There's the tragedy itself, and then there's the institutional response, right? And then there's all the communication failures, and then there's all these questions that remain. And all of those pieces are worth exploring. And when you have all of them together, it presents this really um, huge question mark that to me as a journalist deserves to be explored. And, when events of this magnitude happen, we really need clarity on how they happened, right? What happened that all these failures were able to occur, and then I always approach it with the deep awareness that the families live with the consequences of this every day.
Is
First
the
of all,
oh,
before you talk,
oh, go ahead, Paul. Yeah.
Adam, Adam, I just want to say you're a lawyer too, so you know how to do this stuff as well. So I'm just defending you here. Go ahead,
No,
Adam.
that's great. No, I was wondering if, Amy, if you think maybe that the complexity of the story, which in a way is probably what entices you to it, would be a part of what would turn somebody else off. Is it too complex to distill into, an hour and a half documentary that, makes it just unwieldy for some that, whether or is it that it's a formula that the Netflix and other platforms are expecting, and this somehow doesn't fit into that formula. Like, uh, is there anything there that you think is an issue for
Well,
people?
I think I don't think the fact that it's so complicated is a barrier because documentary really lends itself well to nuance, right? That's the beauty of long form storytelling, is that you have that time to explore all the nuances of a story. You have the time to dig into the complexities and really uncover and then really show the audience what exactly happened and unpack it for them in a very coherent, digestible way. Um, and I think probably the biggest deterrent to platforms having pursued this as a film before now is a logistical one in terms of the lack of what we call archival, which is footage of the scenes. There's not very much footage that would fill up film space when you're talking about what happened in order to illustrate what happened. You need to have the video, right, to show what happened. If you're talking about a scene, if you're talking about the fires, you need to be able to show it. And there's very little footage that was taken at the time. I don't know if it was an issue of the news crews weren't alerted, they weren't allowed near the scenes. Um, there was lack of, there couldn't have been lack of interest, right?
No,
So
there
I
was
don't know,
interest,
Paul,
but it
maybe
was
you,
those
yeah,
first
maybe
two for
you
sure.
can speak. Yeah, maybe the two of you can speak to that better because I've been dumbfounded at the lack of archival footage there is.
Well, I think what happened from the beginning, you understand the first 13 people murdered were in a closed community far away from resources on a Saturday night, and the police shut it down. They didn't put out a public alert. They kept it all quiet and tried to minimize it and keep it quiet. The next day, even though Gabriel Wortman was roaming around Nova Scotia, again, nobody was allowed near the crime scenes. Not even the fire department was allowed near the crime scene. So very few things were taken. Very little film was taken.
Right.
And then after it happened, there was a concerted effort by government and the police to keep a lid on it, to again minimize it. Oh, this was just a thing that happened. We got caught unaware, but we eventually got it right and we killed the bad guy. And then the final part is that most of the families stayed quiet for I think two different reasons. Well, three reasons. One, their personal injury and trauma caused by what happened and not
Sure.
wanting to deal with it. But I think that they were also getting advice from police. Many of the families had Mounties close to them in one way or other, either as neighbors, relatives, friends, whatever.
Right.
And those bounties were whispering in their ear, stay away from the journalists. We'll keep this under control. We don't want you to be harmed. And then the government did that too. And the families ended up signing NDAs with their own lawyers, with government agencies, with the public commission. So
Yeah.
nobody said anything. And this has allowed the government and the police not to be held accountable because everyone thought they were protecting their own interests when really they were protecting the government and the police interests.
You know, the issue of NDAs is very, very interesting because NDAs have been increasingly challenged in the US and not held up to those legal challenges. And I don't know if the same thing has happened in Canada or not.
Seems to be, Amy, like there's, efforts to legislate against it, and courts are starting to come down and say, well, no, that's unenforceable or shouldn't be enforced. And so people are asking to be relieved of their obligations. So what I was saying, just building on what some of Paul was saying there, like the Mass Casualty Commission seemed to have photos of the scene, but I don't recall, Paul, there being many videos filmed on scene. Then it might be that family members, that may have filmed something the night of, they might be willing, or that might be the only source. Whether they're willing or not, I don't know. But at this stage, with the Mass Casualty Commission having been completed, all the criminal matters, those are all completed. And if they settle any lawsuits that are outstanding, which seem to be in the final throes, then they might feel a lot more open to cooperating with something like this.
And I think that one point on the NDAs, I think that in my experience, NDAs are useless. Because if you're going to tell the story for any of the family members to say, well, I signed an NDA, who's going to go after them? The government's
Right.
not going to go
I
after them.
Yeah.
I
The
agree.
police are not going to go after them. They're not going to make a show trial out of that and so, oh, we're going to claw back the money you got because you signed an NDA. It ain't going to happen.
I have worked with many subjects actually previously who were under an NDA, and you analyze the situation and you don't want to be accused of tortious interference, but you analyze the situation and you determine what are the chances, what's the risk, what's the likelihood that the person you signed that NDA with will pursue any kind of repercussion against you, and it's never happened. It's never happened. So and then I'm such a fierce believer in anyone's right to speak. And, you know, none of us family members owe the public their pain, right? So I completely get it that they haven't wanted to speak. I completely get it. I can't imagine anything more awful. I can't than that kind of sudden horrific loss.
So why do a film? Or how do
Because
you do a film without them?
of all the questions that remain, because you can look at the institutional response and the communication failures. It was huge. This is one of the biggest cases that's ever happened in Canada. And if you don't explore how it happened and the processes that were at play here, then how can you ever learn from it, right? How can you have any kind of real reform? Um, it doesn't make sense to me to just sweep it up and say, what's done is done.
Well, here's an idea of its impact, Amy. Like Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the police force of Canada for, since our inception, this this incident led to the commission, which basically recommended that all their role as the national police be examined, addressed, and probably changed. Now, that hasn't really taken off and happened because political will isn't there for it, but that's a significant that recommendation is pretty significant in this whole scheme of society here.
But what the
Well,
problem is, right across Canada, most people like Amy don't even know what happened. It was an incident that happened, it disappeared, and they don't understand the dynamics and the nitty-gritty of everything that happened and all that was going on, And I don't think people, politicians or others, really understand or want to understand it.
well, nobody wants to feel shamed, and nobody wants to feel guilt, and nobody wants to feel, like they failed, right? That they failed their countrymen, that they failed their government. Um, and I think if you go about it in a way where you adhere to the facts and you adhere in a non-punitive way. You adhere to the facts in a non-punitive, punishing way, and you just say, "This is what we're finding. This is what happened. Here's how it went very, very wrong. Here are some things that went very right. And here's what we can learn from that from the future, because that is that is the beauty of documentary, right? Is that you can look at a process, you can look at an institution, and you can examine it in detail and learn.
Well, it's a good approach to making a documentary, and I know one the audience would enjoy. But Amy, just a question that's it's related to what we're saying. You must have a multitude, at least several ideas and projects on the go at all times.
I
Uh,
do.
where like several dozens, like where are
Not
you?
I keep probably four or five
Yeah.
projects going at the same time,
Okay.
um, all times, and they're on the back burner, and then I'll pull one up to the forefront and I'll work on that, and yeah, and that's
Yeah.
how it goes.
Okay, and is there a system to it or a typical way that the projects go, or is it just depends on the project?
It depends on the project, and I have an amazing team, and we've worked together for so many years that we're really in sync in terms of how we communicate and how well we work together. It's really seamless, and so we divide up the different facets, of an investigation. You take that piece, and I'll take this piece, and you go there, and we'll figure it all out, and then we'll come back and collaborate and see if it's worth pursuing further. And sometimes we drop projects. Sometimes we look into it and we say, not worth pursuing. And you put in a few weeks of work and you just realize there's not really a there, or there's not enough for it to go forward. You don't feel like it would get enough support. You don't feel like you would ever be able to get the funding for it. You don't feel like you would ever be able to get a streamer to pick it up. And so you let it go. And that's hard once you've spent time and invested your time and effort and energy into a project. But you learn with each one. And I love digging, and I love like I think very much. I think that's why I was intrigued with Paul after I read his book because I really identified with him. Um, I love the investigative aspect of it all.
Well, the funny thing about this story, and I understand from the film context, documentary context, why it's difficult to tell, is that a lot of the work has been done by me and Adam and our citizen investigators, Chad Jones, Ryan Potter, and others who have uncovered facts, but we've uncovered and we've proven, I think, conclusively that the official narrative is wrong. They lied, they made things up. But now you have to tell a story like what really happened, and there's no film for that. It's just us showing documents and showing what happened, interviewing people here and there. That's tough to sell, isn't it?
That would be tough to sell. I think what could make the difference is, if you had the perspective of the family members in terms of just the magnitude of the impact on them, right? And trying to remember their loved ones in all of their facets of their lives, because lives are so hard to sum up in 1 minute or 2 minutes and in a print story and a couple of quotes. And so I think in long form storytelling, you'd be able to show more of that. And I think that is where the heart of the film could live. Um, I think you would just have to proceed with great sensitivity and care. And obviously, um, cooperation and participation for any of them would be revocable. I mean, at any point they say, you know what, I'm changing my mind, then you're like, okay, I get it. I understand. It's too painful. It's too much. And I get it. And you just wish them well, and you proceed with as much grace as you can.
I wonder what you think, Paul. Like initially, where everybody was coming at these families, different media organizations, everybody wanting an interview. Maybe they just felt, listen, if I open the door, then it's going to be a floodgate. But now, years have passed, and it would be a different experience, I think, at this point if somebody was to come out and speak. But
Well, I think the families have had time to reflect upon what really happened. And the thing I hear from them consistently, the ones that do talk or they send me messages, is they felt let down and traumatized by the whole affair, by the Mass Casualty Commission saying they weren't going to be traumatized, in fact, traumatized the shit out of them because they didn't deal with the facts.
yeah,
And I think there's an opportunity here to deal with the facts and get some degree of closure. And for the family, the 22 people who died, my motivation from the beginning was getting justice for them. You know, that I was there to speak for the dead and to find out what happened to them. And so some of the families would say, "We're not talking to you." I'd say, "Well, I know, I understand your pain, but you weren't there. I have to figure out what was going on, the processes, the institution, the police, which I know very well, and I knew there was something wrong. And we're here 6 years later, still pursuing what went wrong.
Being an American, I have had very few encounters or worked with the RCMP on stories before, one or two where I've just really basically been had phone contacts with them, never anything in terms of an interview. And so I can't speak to that process, but looking at it completely objectively, um, as a journalist, there's just so many questions that remain and things that didn't make sense to me. Like, for example, why was Lisa Banfield never interviewed, you know, under oath? Why was she never given a sworn statement on this? Why was she never questioned about exactly what happened and what led to that rampage? I mean, I think that could have been so illuminating, and um, I, uh, I really questioned that. That's just one of them.
Well, not only Lisa Banfield, but I don't know if you remember this from the stories, but the Mass Casualty Commission said that the 16 people who were closest to to Wortman are excluded from testifying, and we're not bringing them in because it'd be too painful for them. But these are the people that were with them right at the end, who would have an idea what was going on, including Peter Griffin, the convicted drug dealer, drug trafficker, and now we suspect was actually an RCMP agent.
I mean, that's a really solid point, Paul. If you can identify triggers, right? If you can identify motivation, if you can identify the psychological aspects of what was going on in Wortman's head, maybe just maybe you can recognize those patterns and prevent something like this from happening again with someone else who starts to exhibit the same behavior slash patterns slash traits. That's why situations like this are examined and explored and investigative, and typically you interview everyone who had any kind of involvement or exposure to it, and the the reluctance, I will call it reluctance, I don't know what the motivation was, but just the failure to do so, because it's clearly that it was a failure to do so. The lack of that being done is stunning to me, remains stunning to me.
Well, it's a it's an interesting perspective, Amy. Like we're been engrossed in this for years now, watching the comings and goings of the Mass Casualty Commission. So it's really interesting to hear this as sort of a more fresh perspective. I mean, if you've read Paul's book, you're well into it, of course, anyway. But but to hear that perspective, I think would be, I think, appreciated by any of the viewers.
And I
Um,
would invite anyone who wants to get a hold of you. If they don't want to talk to us, they might want to talk to you. I
I'm
think
easy to reach. I'm easy to
your contact information is online. Amy Herdy at is it Cove Tower?
Amyherdy. Yes, and my web page, my company is Cove Tower, that I co-founded with Jim Moscow. So it's covetower.com is my web page. It lists my body of work, and you can send an email to Cove Tower, or you can email me directly, amyherdy at covetower.com.
well, that's great. Yeah, we mentioned some of the people can go on the website and then figure out where to watch one of your documentaries too, just to get a sense of what it's all
That's
about.
true of the work that I've done. Yes.
Yeah, I want to watch
I
this
have.
Titan one. We were talking about billionaires earlier. That Titan is an example of billionaires gone astray too. So,
Yeah.
Anything we should have asked you that we didn't ask you you'd like to talk about?
No, I think you did a great job. I think you covered all of it. And I just one thing I don't know that I made clear enough is just how much respect I have for you, Paul. Adam, no offense, because I just haven't really worked with you at all, but
that's all
I've been
right.
talking with Paul for months now, looking into this, and I have a deep respect for the way you work and the way your mind works and the care and the integrity with which you've approached this whole case.
Well, thank you. And as I said, I was attracted to you in the last because you're different from the ones I was dealing with in the beginning. I understood the families were upset early on because Chris Smith was involved from Tiger King, which was aired just before the massacres or just around that time. And family said, we don't want those people involved. In fact, I didn't know those people were involved at the beginning. When I started working with them, it was through a company in Montreal. I didn't realize who was behind it. And I even felt queasy about it, because I
Oh,
wasn't there to make a sensational story. I'm an institutional guy. I deal with the institutions, not with so much with the individuals.
yes. And I can't imagine um, the last thing, I will say this, I would think that the last thing that any family member would want is for this story to be sensationalized in any way. So I understand that completely. I really do.
No, that's great, Amy, and great note to end on. And we want to thank you. By the way, I'm fascinated by Paul. Everybody is. Everybody up here too. We get
You
comments on
know,
that all the time. Every time
we
I
are,
meet
I
somebody,
love it. We're the old school gumshoe journalists,
yeah,
and we are kindred spirits. And when I meet a fellow journalist who follows that, it warms my heart. It does. I just love it. It gives me hope that there's hope for all of us.
there is,
Well, Amy,
and
you know what they call me in Canada? Conspiracy theorist. So
Oh,
we
well,
got to get over that.
when it's backed up by evidence, it's not a conspiracy.
exactly right.
Right.
No,
Thank you.
thank you very much, Amy, and look forward to seeing what comes of all of this, if anything. And we're may get you back on to talk again at some point if there's anything more to come.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Have a great night.
You too.
Right. Well, that was great, Paul. And when I meet people, by the way, fans of the show or whatever, they're like, "Oh yeah, I like your show," and they'll always have a question about Paul. What does Paul do all the time? Anyway, uh,
I'm a glass artist, just sort of.
yeah, it's just a humble artist. But no, it's great. No, that'll be interesting to see in a different perspective, a different kind of approach to documentaries there. So, hopefully something comes from that. All right, Paul. By the way, I was going to look ahead a little bit. We didn't cover the biggest story in the world, which is the war on Iran, war with Iran. I'm not sure where we are yet. U.S. Israeli strikes, and the British, I think, joined or at least defended a regional air base again today. So, yeah, Middle East again.
Donald Trump will do anything to cover up the Epstein problems he has, Epstein problems.
Yeah,
And I know this is him. Who knows what's going to happen here?
yeah, it's great.
Because the Ayatollah was not in some ways you could argue he needed to be taken out. He's brutalizing his own people. You don't want to be a woman in Iran because of or any of these places where the cult controls. The thing we talked about before. You have the Americans who are basically being driven by right wing Catholic or Christian religion. Israel's being driven by right wing Orthodox Judaism, and Iran driven by right wing, uh, you know, fundamentalists, Islamic. You
Yeah,
have three religions basically involved here. Although I'm not so sure about the Americans being religious driven as well as much as money driven, but
yeah,
it's just what happens. You have no accountability. You allow religion to take over. If the Ayatollah had was an agent of God, he's going to have to get his God, and all the future Ayatollahs have to get their gods to solve the bunker buster bombs because
yeah.
uh, they can't hide. And with AI and everything now, there's going to be fewer places for all us to hide unless we do something about bringing things under control.
Well, omnipotence has its limits, apparently. No, it's the same old story, Paul. Like whether it's Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi, Nicolas Maduro, the Ayatollah. All right, great. They should be gone. What comes next? Who's coming next to take over? Is it going to be better or worse? So we'll see.
Well, I'd hate to
Something.
be on, an airplane anywhere in the world over the next couple of years because whatever the Iranians had, they do have sleeper cells around the world that it's said, and they do have weaponry, and they will do things out of revenge. Donald Trump acts out of revenge. and craziness, well, so do they. And this makes the world a dangerous place.
Yeah, bad mix. All right, well, we'll watch for that. Lots of other stories to cover as well, and we'll be back next week with episode 51.
51.
Getting,
Li.
yeah,
Li
well,
in
I,
Latin.
yeah, Randy Johnson in baseball. Okay, well, we'll see you next week, Paul. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Great.